turn the keys, the fingertips that reach out to touch them, the string that begs to be bent? Or is it in the notes on a page, a foot to a pedal, the infinite space between imagination and skill? Or is it simply music?
Well, good morning and welcome everyone to the Art of Mastery podcast. This started with the 13th note, which is all about mastering your craft. And today we have an incredible guest. This is Josh Reid of Red Pill Project. This man has incredible skills of research and knowledge. And this is one of the things that today we're doing something that is extremely different than the art that develops a certain skills from an instrument or a certain craft. This is about mastering your mind. So if you will, let's welcome Josh.
Jeff,
now, Jeff,
thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on and joining me on the Art of Mastery. Without you, we really wouldn't have inspired me to do a lot of these podcasts. And just for our audience to know that I've been following Josh for years, and the knowledge and the information that I've acquired from listening to him has been incredible. And to be able to sit with you today and to kind of pick your mind and understand the process of how you can become what I've heard people call you as the walking encyclopedia. And that is amazing to me, that how much depth in the information that you actually can contain and be able to share and talk about it at depth and at length. So let's start with this. Give me an idea of when you were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I know the audience knows quite a bit because you tell us a lot, but during the school years, the formative years, what kind of students were you, and how did you assess and grow and have the aptitude during those K through 12 years?
It's an interesting question because I was actually a horrible student. I hated school. I remember very vaguely, but from elementary school, I didn't understand. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand why I was there. Nobody explained to me what learning was or why I was learning, or, none of that happened. My parents didn't do it. My teachers didn't do it. It was just throwing information at you all the time, trying to get you to pass tests. And I just didn't like it. And very early on in my life, I found myself more within my imagination than anything.
Sure.
I found myself just dreading school and waiting to get out. I didn't have very many friends. And then when I would get home, it would all be about playtime. It'd all be about going outside and playing with the few neighbors that we had, or, going into my room and, playing G.I. Joes with my imagination. But, when I look back on it now, I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, I didn't need to be a good student, because the education system these days is completely out of whack with what we truly need as human beings. But, I learned a lot of valuable lessons throughout my my adolescence. And really it comes down to that, if you're an outsider, if you're someone who is in the school system and you're just feeling out of place, the reason being is because you are, and you got to find your clique. You got to find that place where you can consider home, that place of comfortability to where you can actually sit down and learn. And for me, I talked about this a few different times, and it really developed into a theory later on in life. I remember like my first conscious moments. And what I mean by that is that a time frame in my life to where it all clicked. It all came together. It was a big wake up moment, like, oh, I get it. And from that moment, it was trying to undo all the bad habits that I had started when I was younger. Now, my first kind of like conscious moment that I had, I think I was about 5 years old, and my mother and I were walking behind the house to this trail from the grocery store to our house. And I asked her to pick me up, and she said, I'm not picking you up. You're a big boy, And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what's going on? And she goes, you start kindergarten tomorrow. And then I go to kindergarten. I remember I cried for an hour just wanting my mom and didn't want to go. And then, it's a blur from there to about the age of 10. And right around the age of 10, I remember this moment where I was just like, I woke up and something inside me was like, hey, hi, how are you? And from that moment, it was kind of, okay, I got to find a friend group. I got to learn things. I got to know things. I got to learn the environment and the world around me. And that's really when I started to focus on those things. And unfortunate for me is that I started to align with my brothers. I had 3 older brothers at the time.
Right.
And I started to align with kind of what they did in life. And that would have been sports, which was not a bad thing. But then, hanging out with the bad crowds and, 11, 12 years old and going to Friday night bonfires with 18-year-olds and, drinking kegs of beer. Wow. And, starting that really early in life. And then, eventually getting into drugs at 12 and 13 years of age. But that became my clique. That became my friend zone. And I developed a massive amount of social skills in and around that time due to the fact that I had found a level of acceptance within society, people that would take me in and just not care who you were or what you looked like, but instead would, be your friend and have deep, long conversations. And, it was an interesting time in my life because I look back on it now and I see kind of this progression. And I call it conscious evolution. Wow. And that I'm all about physics. I love the physics of understanding things. And, when I started to do a lot of LSD in my younger years at 12 and 13, I would go home and I would read Dr. Michio Kaku's Hyperspace. I would go home and study physics and math, and I would get lost in books, even though the words were coming off the pages. Right. And I would try to expand my mind as much as possible to try to unlock something. And, when I start to go back now, I start to understand the energy aspect of things, is that there is an energy and a mass equivalence when it comes to who and what we are. And this is kind of what Einstein was telling us in a physics perspective. But when we look at it in a spiritual perspective, what I begin to see is that at conception, you have a grouping of cells, which is doubling every so often. Yeah. But that doubling of cells doesn't have the necessity to hold the energy of the soul, of the spirit. And then when the infant comes out, that infant doesn't have the capacity. Because if we look at the energy density, it doesn't have the capacity to hold the energy of that soul. And so I developed a theory of what I call coming into being. And we see this through many indigenous traditions and various different religious philosophies, that you have this coming to age in and around adolescence, 15 and 16 and so forth. Yeah. And really what I think this is what the soul really does begin to latch on into the body itself. And that when we're going through life, our primitive years, is that our soul is kind of just in and out. It's not necessarily fully there until one day it just, boom, it comes to this point of realization, and it actually comes into the body and we become aware of it. And that's when we kind of start to move forth and progress in our life and develop who we are, our ego, our characteristics, our attributes, our personality.
Right.
And so, I mean, and I love the theory because it makes a lot of sense with a lot of people I've talked to. But that idea as well, in my teenage years, I studied a lot of esotericism, a lot of occultism. I started looking into, the mysteries of life, of the universe, of the soul, of mind. I was fascinated with people like Nikola Tesla. And this is in the 90s. I read all of David Icke's books that came out from 92 on forth. I was into conspiracy. And I think the reason I was into those types of things is because they helped me to kind of escape from the norm of reality, but also begin to understand the patternization and the outflow of how nature evolves, at least in the context of how in humanity. But my going all the way up to my 18 years of age, I did a lot of drugs, man. I did.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say to people that I recommend it because I don't, but I'm one of the lucky ones. And I can tell you that all the LSD I did when I was younger, between the age of 13 to 18, it changed my biochemistry. And I'm fortunate that it changed my biochemistry in a good way to help me understand the patterns of the world, the complex structure that exists in between all of us, and gave me an extrapolative mind to go really, really deep in the imagination and really to begin to master it to the idea of kind of what, old esoteric philosophers would try to understand, the third eye concept.
Right. That's amazing. And I know you've talked about past lives, and you have the recollections of your past lives.
Yeah.
Do you have, let's say this, do you believe that you carry that with you and that's part of your aptitude? Do you believe that having that richness of past lives, when you come to this existence, that you have an opportunity probably a little bit easier than ones that has not been here as much?
Good question. So yes, I have an understanding and recollection of my past lives, but I utilize them in a certain perspective. And maybe this is a good point to explain to everybody is, I've gone through various different meditation, hypnosis sessions. I've had deep revelations. I've had visitations, and a lot of these things have shown me past lives. Now, I carry that with me, but it is not me. And I want to express that in this point that our mind is a very, very interesting thing.
Yes.
And even though that I've had these experiences where I've, was a Roman general, or I was a high priestess in Atlantis or Egypt, or, I was an electrical engineer back in the 1940s, or, a philosopher, or whatever I was, that those things are not me. And that even though I was having those visions or those scenes within my mind, the real question comes about in the conceptuality of mind is that, was that real? Right. And I want people to understand this is that, Jeff, this is kind of funny because this is one thing I always joke with, especially when people talk to me about past lives. Is you ever notice that everybody who ever talks about their past lives, they were always like Napoleon, or they were a king, or they were someone famous that through history. Those stories I immediately dismiss. I just say, you know what? Good for you. I'm glad you had that experience. Have a good day. Right.
Yeah.
And the reason being is because you never hear of the average person. You never hear of the World War II pilot, the person who was just a farmer. Right. Yeah. Those are the ones that I want to listen to, because those are the interesting ones, because that person is talking from the heart and truth instead of trying to exemplify their experience and saying, I was, an Egyptian pharaoh. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is that I don't deny that person had an experience.
Sure.
The question is how real was that experience? And what I mean by that is our mind is incredibly powerful. Our imagination is incredibly powerful. And when we go into these altered states of consciousness, and what I mean by altered is just deviations from our current wakefulness state, our happening state. I call it the happening state. This is happening, right? This is our happening state. So what I see is that, you can go into these states and you can have your imagination flood your awareness with all these different types of visions and imagery and storylines. And if we choose to believe it, we think it's real.
Yeah.
But is it? Or is it just what you needed at that moment? Is it just a creation, a figmentation of your imagination? So I have a hard time inside my mind when these things happen to me, asking myself, was this truly real? So what I've done over the years is I've come to understand this, that when we're receiving information from outside of the happening, outside of our world that we exist in right now, we have to take it with a grain of salt. We have to look at it and perceive it, not necessarily as something real or something that happened, but something that is meant to teach or show you something, to unveil something, to expand into something. So whenever we're seeing these things happen, for instance, I've had this one past life experience, and it was validated to me with a really beautiful human being friend of mine the next day. And this was Roman soldiers. And we had this vision where Roman soldiers, we clasped each other's hands, both generals. I was his under general. We said, if we shall die in this life, shall we meet each other in the next? And come to find out that he had the same type of vision. He had the same perspective of that life. Now, was that real, or was that just something that bonded and merged us together, that the universe or imaginations or collective consciousness created to produce that singular bond between us that is going to be unbreakable for the rest of eternity, right? So we have to kind of look at that. Our mind will play tricks on us, especially when we're looking at things that are outside the norm or the balance of what our mind truly exists. So one of the things, I had these experiences with this being that I call Sephora. And there was this one point in time where I was in this meditation and I kind of rise up this tunnel. And she's standing there talking to some other beings, but it's not like standing there human beings, it's standing there light beings.
Yeah.
And she says, how are you here? And I said, I heard you call my name. I came up here. She goes, you can't be here. I'm talking to you right now. And she points to a being that she's talking to. And I said, well, that's odd. And I said, why does this look so different? And she goes, well, when you experience things that are outside of your normal world and universe, your mind can't actually comprehend or bring in things that are beyond the dimensionality of your regular world. So it creates stories and images and fictitious characters to fill in the gaps of how it can't process that information. She says a lot of UFO abductions are exactly this, is that people create this fictitious story based upon their social, their cultural influences throughout life. When they have this experience that is beyond time, that they can't really explain, and they fill it with being on a bed in a UFO with aliens probing you. But in actuality, that is nothing like what happened. Your brain just wasn't able to process the information from the higher dimensionality. So whenever I see kind of like the past life stuff, I always take that in the perspective that it's not a matter of if it's real or if it's a fiction of my imagination. The question is what am I taking from it? Right? What is coming into me in my life and the happening right now?
Yeah.
And so when I try to learn from that, I mean, there's one where I was a high priestess. And the beautiful thing about that is that I was doing a psychic initiation. So I was with a world-renowned psychic, Marie Claire, and we were in Alexandria, Virginia, Old Town at I think it was a Sacred Circle spiritual shop there, if anybody's down in that Nova area. And it was like a 4-hour session that we did. Paid a lot of money to be there. There was like 5 or 6 of us. And at the end of the night, after we honed in our skills and she taught us about kind of using the mind and understanding energy and all this stuff, we go into this room in this 700-year-old building. So we're in a 700-year-old building. James Madison's house in Alexandria, Virginia is right next to it, you know, and we're up in the upstairs bedroom and all the lights are off and there's a closet. And inside the closet, there's a candle on a table. And the objective was for everybody to go, one person at a time, to go into the closet, close the door, and then say to yourself, show me my most important past life and let me get the information. It was something of that nature. And you'd close your eyes and blow out the candle, and then you would open your eyes. And I went in there and I said something, and I closed my eyes and I blew out the candle and I opened my eyes, and there's this guy standing in front of me.
Wow.
And he's like, and it was like an apparition. It was like a ghost standing in front of me. And he's wearing like this blue and green kind of like triangular sash right here. And he's got skin, so it's like just there's no shirt on. And he's got like this this headset, the headdress is just coming down. And kind of got like a crown that comes up like this. And he immediately, I see like Egyptian or Atlantean, I don't know. But he's talking to me in this foreign language, which I don't understand. Wow. And he's looking at me and he's like talking to me like this. And he's just going so fast and he's trying to get everything out. And he goes, boom, like that. And then the door opens. And I'm like, what the heck? And I walk out and I like just blown away. I'm ghostly white. And Marie Claire, the psychic, goes, so what did the Atlantean priest have to say?
Wow.
And I'm like, what? But from that, I carried a lot with me.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. There's things that download in your life, and people are like, I got such a download, I got to write it all down. Well, here's the thing about downloads. They're not meant to be written down. They're meant to unfold within your life. I call it the great unfoldment.
Interesting. Yes.
Right? Is that these things are meant to unlock like levels on a game within your life. As you move through life, certain things are going to happen and something's going to unlock, and you're going to be like, oh, and you're going to put things together, and then new information is going to be opened up to you. And when that new information opens up, that new pathway, you're going to have a aha or an epiphany or a revelation. You're going to go, oh, now it's starting to make so much more sense now. Wow. And that's how these downloads unravel within us. It's like a new system update that you have to get to certain levels in order for them to expand outward. So, so the past life thing, I absolutely believe in it. I know that I've had a massive number of past lives.
Sure. Oh, you're so good looking.
Yeah. A massive number of, yeah. Oh, you're so good looking. A massive number of past lives. But, whether I determine them real or not real, to me, it doesn't matter. To me, it's about who and what I am now and how it defines me and how it informs me and the knowledge that I can extrapolate from it.
Right. Well, fantastic. Then with that, do you remember about the age, that time when you start to recognize these type of things? Is it as far back as the 5-year-old or is it just little increments as you moved along?
Well, so that's interesting. I mean, I had a lot of paranormal, I guess, if you want to call it, experiences from my early childhood. I remember being paralyzed in my bed multiple different times with, ghosts or monsters or those types of things in a house. And, mom or dad would come in and say, oh, it's just your imagination. Go to sleep. Well, come to find out that it wasn't my imagination. All my brothers were having the same experiences. Wow. That the house that we were in, the house I grew up in a small town in Western New York, was built in 1809. It was the first library in the town. And then eventually a few years later, it turned into kind of a farmhouse. But there was a rich history of the house. And the house next to it actually had an exorcism done on it. Yeah. And so my oldest brother, he moved out of that house when he was 19. And he talked about this experience that he had of, and I never knew this living there. And this was much later on, that he woke up one night and there was this guy hovering over him, and he got up and started swinging at it, and it moved over to his desk, and he ended up breaking 2 knuckles and 3 toes, kicking and trying to beat this thing as it went to his closet. And he tells us later on that this thing had been terrorizing him his whole life.
Wow.
that had been coming out of his closet his whole life after him. And, then things started to make a lot more sense that this house that we lived in actually had, apparitions, that there was this ghost that would come up. So his closet backed up to a bathroom closet. And you'd never want to go into that bathroom alone, that closet. It felt like something would always come out of that closet and look at you, or something was watching you in the bathroom. It was the weirdest stuff in the world.
Wow.
Then I moved into my mom's house, which was down the road about a quarter mile. And that's where stuff got really weird. In the context of paranormal, ghosts, and even some other type of stuff that happened. And then I had an abduction experience when I was 10 years old. And I didn't even know that this was an abduction experience until very later in my life. And, Jeff, I've told this story hundreds, if not thousands of times.
Yeah.
And I was telling it one night on my show. And then after the show, we went to a Zoom. And they're telling me, oh, tell us the story again. And I tell the story again. And I tell the story again, and the story's this: is me and my buddy were having a sleepover. We were 10 years old. We were obsessed with ninjas. We watched Ninja Turtles, or whatever ninja movies we were watching, some Michael Dudikoff movie or something. And we decided to get dressed up as ninjas and get kitchen knives all tucked away, and we got our Tommy boots on, and we're gonna walk to my dad's house. So there's a field, like 400 yards of field between my mom's house and my dad's house.
Yeah.
And so we're out there, we're crawling on the ground, and 10 years old, me and my buddy Tommy, and we get to this mound, this little berm in this area, and it's 200 yards away from my mom's house. And we had Rochester International Airport to my left, so that would have been to the north. And to the south, we see a plane coming in, and I see the plane coming in, and it's really low. And you have the lights on it. And you ever seen like the plane that'll drop down a spotlight and you can see like the light? Yeah. So I'm like, whoa, look at the plane. And we're like, oh my God, I can't hear it. It's silent. I'm like, whoa, that one looks like it's going to crash. And we're sitting there and we're watching it. And it's coming down and it's getting brighter and brighter and brighter. And the next thing I know, we're crawling again. And I'm like, what just happened? But we're crawling and the grass has dew on it. That was about 11:30 when we were crawling on the grass the first time.
Yeah.
So it has dew on it. We get up and we run to my dad's house, and there's my dad in the living room behind the door. Like, where the hell have you been? We're like, what are you talking about? It's like 11:30. He's like, it's 4:30 in the morning. We're like, oh. And I'm like, I tell the story, and that's where it ended. And I'm on the Zoom and someone goes, oh, you had missing time. I'm like, no, I didn't. Like, yeah, you did. And then, Jeff, I told the story exactly that way.
Yeah. Oh, I've heard it. Yeah.
And it's never dawned on me. It's like there's something that skips over it.
Right.
That it was missing time. And I'm like,
did any kind of panic set in after you recognized that? There was missing time. Okay.
Oh yeah. When I was like, whoa. It was like a deep rebel, like, oh no, whoa. Hold on a second here.
Yeah.
And that's when kind of I started to see things a little bit differently in the perspective of that story.
Yes.
And I've had multiple different types of stories like that, very similar.
Right.
But yeah, so I've had these paranormal, these spiritual experiences throughout my life. I've been visited, and people are like, oh, another person that's been visited by beings or aliens or angels or whatever.
Yeah.
But here's my perspective on it. Was it real? And so I think that we have to have this point of our mind, an understanding. I call them pathways, right? Default pathways that we go into. And we'll get more into the kind of the construction of the mind and how it works here in a little bit. But I think that we have to have this skepticism about everything that happens in our lives. Is that real or is that not real? Well, guess what? It doesn't matter, because it was an experience for me. It was real for me. It doesn't matter if it was just a a figment of my imagination or if it was something that physically happened. It was real for me. It was my experience. And I must take that and understand it and learn from it, because this is probably the reason I had that experience. So, were these beings real that I met? To me, they were absolutely real. To me, they were there.
Mhm.
Now, would they be considered real to someone who's measuring the situation and trying to understand it? I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
really care. It's
Yeah.
not about that, right?
Yeah.
So, but we have to have this level of skepticism that we have to question our reality. We have to
Yes.
question our experiences, because a lot of times what can happen is that we can just have a great daydream, a vivid daydream of our
Mhm.
imagination. And we can be like, oh my God, it was so spiritually profound. And this is what I learned. And this is the world around me. And this is what needs to happen. But yet it was just a data dump of your mind kind of regressing back over the last few days. And so we have to approach everything with a high level of skepticism. And that skepticism has to be a built-in mechanism of our functionality. And this is what's made me so successful in life in the context of mind and understanding the mind and data. We have to have a differentiation between the left and the right brain. We have to have an actuator that sits there and says, hold on, what is really going on here? Right? Did I really experience this or did I not? Well, if I did, well, that's pretty profound. And it means A, B, and C are true. If I didn't, well, that's even equally as profound. And that means that A, B, and C are true. So maybe the truth lies in the middle somewhere, that yes, I had this experience and it's subjective unto me, right? That experience doesn't exist in the objective reality, but yet that means that A, B, and C are true. And now I can move about my life. So I take all 9 options into consideration. I look at a viewpoint of all 9 options, and I call these pathways. So I used to have memory problems, and I always just equated it to all the weed I smoked, right?
So, I mean, we're talking about short-term memories or just
short-term memories. Like I forget things all the time.
Okay.
And I still do to this day.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I've done is I was watching this guy who was a master at memorization one time. And he was teaching how to memorize cards. And he would take a deck of cards, he would shuffle them up, and he'd go like that. And he could tell you all the positions of all the cards. And I'm like, how is he doing that? And he says that what he does is that he creates for a jack or a queen or a king or a 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it might be, is that there's a story, that each one of them is a character in a story. Right. And that as he flips it across, he could see the story unfold in his mind. And now all he does is he tells back the story. And so I realized that structured anchoring with narrative are so critically important to preserving our memories and understanding information. So structured anchoring with narrative. So you basically think about it as a trip. You're going to take a trip back in the olden days. We'd have to print out the maps, right?
Yeah.
But you're going to take a trip, you would have waypoints. So first 400 miles, this is where we're going to stop. This is the next 400 miles. This is where we're going to stop. This is the next 400 miles. This is where we're going to stop. But at each trip, at each waypoint, guess what? There's multiple different ways that you can go with it.
Right.
Each waypoint takes you from your current destination to another destination. And that other destination, there's more options. There's different options. There's different things that we can drive. We can drive that way. We can go see sights. We can go to the lake. We can go to the ocean. We can go north. We can go south. We can go east, but never go back the way you came. So one of the things that when I started to look at this is that I could generate a level. If I had information on something, I could take that information and I use that as a waypoint. And so I develop a point from where I am to where I'm going. And that information exists in that zone. And then when I get to that new waypoint, that's more information on that topic, I expand it. And then I expand it more. So every time that I talk or explain anything, I always deal with a structure. That structure is, I always talk about foundational structure. I have to get a foundation out so people are going to understand what I'm saying. So I build a foundation. From that foundation, I start building the framework for what I'm talking about. And then I build the structure into the framework, right?
Yeah.
And so it starts out with levels of simplicity and then evolves in the higher levels of complexity, because that's just the way my mind works, moving through the various different node points of these anchor positions of information. But information is structured like that. I mean, if we think about how our mind works, I've looked into this heavily, and I'll give people my theoretical analysis on it. Is that we have neural densities. So we have trillions upon trillions of neurons that exist in various different patterns and configurations within our body, more notably in our brain. Your neural configuration and my neural configuration are completely different. Nobody on this planet, let alone in the universe, has the same density and patternization and configuration of neural structure within their body. It's impossible. You're talking about trillions upon trillion to the trillion to the trillion to the trillionth power of permutations of how that could be different. But what happens is that those neurons fire in sequences and patterns over time, right? Firing of neurons and sequences and patterns over time is a thought. This is how thoughts are generated, or how we experience a thought. And so we come to find out that energy is very, very influential within our mind, that we have an influence from subtle energy fields that exist around us. And then we have this process that happens and occurs within our mind. And I started to realize early in my life that all communication is neurological. That all communication, whether it's speaking, whether it's body language, whether it's the gaze of the eye, that all of it is neurological. And people are saying, well, isn't that electromagnetic? No, it's not necessarily electromagnetic. It's neurological. It's various different patterns of electrical impulses that are producing biochemical impulses that are happening in processes over time. So our mind operates at this very, very core foundational level, neurological. And when we begin to understand that, we can understand how the mind begins to evolve from that point. That a memory is a certain pattern of firing over time that is stored inside of here, right? So it's an imprint of energy of a pathway that when that pathway's lit up, it sparks an image in our mind, and oh, that's a memory, right? Yeah. And what could stimulate that? Well, similar frequencies to what happened when that memory was created. So if we have, a deja vu moment, or we have, experience where something occurs in our life, then sparks a massive amount of influential energy, whether that's emotional, electromagnetic, chemical, whatever it might be. It produces a neurological response. That neurological response begins to pulsate and resonate at various different frequencies. And then that stimulates our core of our brain to begin firing in patterns and sequences, which can bring about overlays of memories, of patterns, old patterns that begin to fill our mind with visions and imagery. And so once I started realizing kind of how all of this worked inside of our body, I started being able to become a master of it, to utilize it to my benefit, to expand within it and deeply understand it. Yes. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about life is that, we're all experts at something, and I don't care who the person is out there. If they're, in their grandma's basement, they're, 52 years old, playing video games, smelling their own farts, they are still a master at something within their life. Yeah. Right. And that's, yes, it's the beautiful thing of who we are. Yes. And, I think that at a very core level, one of our purposes here is to become a master of who and what you are, a master of you. Yes. I think, and we like to say a master of a trade, but it's the master of you, because the only reason that trade is mastered is because you've mastered that trade yourself. It is you who has become the master. And I think that goes back to very different core parts of Eastern philosophy, right?
Yes.
Is that, once you get a black belt, you're just beginning in martial arts, right?
Yeah.
And it is discerning the people that once you get the black belt, you're just starting. What? Well, yeah. And to master that is to truly master yourself. All of the tests and all of the things that you go through in life are not meant to deter you or to impede you. They're meant to help you grow internally amongst yourself. And that the various things that we do and express in our external life are exactly that, expressions of that internal mastery.
Well, it's just incredible that your brain processes all of this, and you're able to put it together and share it. In the uniqueness of your story too, that absolutely fascinates me, is that how openness in regards to the psychedelic experience you had at such a young age, and then you went into the military, which usually is a more rigid, confined, a system that is structured. So coming from such an openness and then going to that, what was that decision? Why did you go there? And then how did you adapt and learn and work with that system?
Great question. And here's the beautiful thing about it. I had never had anything like that before in my life. I had never had structure. I mean, I played high school football, but football players, we ruled the school.
Yeah.
And so it was a different story. We could get away with anything. But when I went into the military, it was number one, it was a culture shock, but it was like it was a last hope for me. I had burned all the bridges in my life. I had nowhere else to go. I had no place to stay. I didn't want to get another job. I wasn't going to finish school. And the military seemed like the only option. So it was something that I had to go through and that I had to do. And I went through it, and it was it wasn't difficult. It was actually more relieving. It was more of like, oh my goodness. Like, well, here's the thing. Is when you have someone else designing the structure of your life, you can just sit back and just follow directions.
Understand that. Yes.
You don't, there's not much thinking. You can just do what you're told. And for a short time in my life, I did what I was told. And, I learned a lot about myself and the world around me from that. And, the military is interesting because it starts out with kind of, you're a prisoner, you're a slave, right? In boot camp, but then you earn degrees of freedom. So you get out of boot camp, and then you go to a school, and that school is a certain degree of freedom from boot camp. Now you can go out in town, do these things. And then you go to another school. And the next school is another degree of freedom. And then you go to your third school, and that third school is even a larger degree of freedom. But if you mess up one time, bloop, right back to that restrictive phase of no freedom. And then you get to your ship, and it's the same thing, but it's a little bit different. That when you're on that ship, your degrees of freedom are limited. It's that restrictive phase. The moment you step off that ship, you're back to that highest level of freedom. And it's all about that personal responsibility of knowing the difference. It's all about understanding your role and what you need to do when you're inside the boundaries confined by that task or that job. And it produced for me a high level of mental discipline. And it's I began reading a lot when I was in the military. I deployed with the U.S. Navy multiple different times. And we'd get garbage bags of books donated to the ships and just dumped in the barracks floors. And I remember just going through and picking out a whole bunch of different, I actually got some of them sitting right up there. And pick out a whole bunch of different books, and I would read because you have so much time to yourself. But I will tell you that, you know what made it all worth it?
What's that?
Through all of the stuff I went through in 10 years in the military, there is these serene experiences I had. And I remember thinking, like, this makes it all worth it. I remember sitting on a ship, you have forward and aft. Aft is the back of the ship. And on a Navy ship, you have what's called the poop deck. And that's in the olden days where they would go and dump the buckets of poop off. So they call it the poop deck. It's usually behind the flight deck. And so I'd be sitting on the poop deck, and we'd be sitting on in the middle of the ocean, 300 miles away from anywhere in the world. No continent near us, 300 miles away. And if people want to imagine this, go to Peru and go 300 miles west to the middle of the ocean. That's where we were, right?
Wow.
And imagine completely calm ocean waters, no movement, no wind. Your ship is running dark. The only thing that you have is a red mast light that is lit up. Everything else is completely dark. You can't see your hand in front of your face. And it's clear skies.
Yeah.
And what you have is the tapestry of Mother Nature, of King Universe before your face. You can see everything that the universe has to offer right there in that moment.
Yeah.
And I've had multiple moments at sea with exactly that perspective of just taking it all in, tears rolling down my eyes, looking up at the sky and just seeing the brilliance of the cosmos.
Yeah.
And the peace and serenity that you have of being out in the ocean.
Yeah.
It is something that is, I recommend everybody, if you get the opportunity to do something like that, do it and get as far away from land as possible. But it made it all worth it. It made all 10 years worth it to have those experiences of life where I could witness the glory of the cosmos like that, in that setting of just, number one, I was alone. So there's nobody with me. It's just me. Number two, it's just this peaceful serenity. If you can imagine the waves and the ships, it's hypnotic, it's calming, it's soothing.
Right.
You're going back and forth and you're laying on your back and you're just watching the universe unfold before you. And it's brilliant. And it's visions like that that really kind of set the precedence for my life, because it makes me want to know. It makes me want to understand. It makes me want to just delve into it and find out everything I can possibly find about its truth and its existence.
Yeah. Wow. I can only imagine how grand that was. You know, I've been out in the ocean on a cruise ship, had similar feeling, but not as grand because you spent so much alone time. And I had this, so-called commercialism, fun factor, noise and all that still vibrating around me. But yeah, I can imagine being out and being connected, that vastness of space to you. That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible experience. And okay, so with you now doing podcasts of the Daily Dose, and you do conversations on the fringe, you do so many aspects of what's going on, current events, to history, the mysticisms and all that. This is why it's so intriguing to me about you, is the knowledge of every direction, like you say, the path we can go down to. You can speak very intelligently, very much in depth, and often bring up stuff that most of us just like, where did you get this? Because as much as I do research, there's always stuff that you bring out. So share with all of us in regards to when you dive into something and you do a deep dive. What is that like in the sense of time involvement or the attention that you say, I got to mark this, I got to note that? Share with us on those things.
Yeah. So, it's why I consider myself blessed, because I say that I already did all the groundwork. And what I mean by that is that throughout my life, I've always read about these things. I've always, listened to various different, coast to coast AM shows or what it was. I used to be in email groups with all the coast to coast guests and stuff like that, and collaborate with them in the early 2000s when I was in the military. But I say that I've already done the groundwork. And what I mean by that is that there's nothing new under the sun. How much research goes into a show? Well, that research was my life. So a life of research. But how much goes into that actual show? An hour or so, maybe 10, 15 minutes, depending. Yeah. Some shows I don't do any research. I just jump right in. Sometimes I just open up the book and I start reading. What I mean by that is sometimes I just go on a show and I don't know what to expect, and let's just see where it goes.
Yeah.
And so the interesting thing is that you begin to tie things together. One thing leads to another, and it opens up a door. And when we understand that we store things in our mind as stories, right? This evolving story with waypoints and expansion. Then we can pick up on that story anywhere in the book. So doesn't matter if I'm doing my own show or going to another show, is that one thing is always going to ignite a neurological firing of patterns over time in my brain. So if I'm sitting there and I'm talking about current events and I read something or I say something, that immediately sparks another neurological impulse that brings it into the memory and says, hey, that's related to this, and this. And those are the forks in the road. Now I can select the next place where I'm going. And then that does the same thing again. That does the same thing again. And what my objective always is everything's interconnected, to come full circle, to always bring it back around, right? So how much research depends on the topic. If it's a topic that I don't know very much about or I haven't touched in a long time, I'm going to refresh myself on, but never usually more than an hour's worth of research.
Wow. And you do it, 4 or 5 shows a week on the Daily Dose, which is current events. And especially as congested as is becoming on what's all going on geopolitical and geofinancial current state. What would you say that now folks are starting to wake up to this? Let's just say that because of your history, you've had dealt with this conspiracy theory type of things, and you've always had knowledge of these things. Some folks just don't have any of this until, let's say, maybe a year ago. What is the craziness of our world and so forth? How would you help them to start to understand and how to do research at that very beginning of awakening?
It goes back to a gentleman that probably everybody's familiar with by the name of Terence McKenna. In one of Terence McKenna's last interviews, he's talking about novelty theory. And he's talking about how as we approach 2012, which was his time wave 0, he says, as we get towards it, things are going to get weird. And they're going to get so weird that people are going to begin talking. They're going to go, things are getting weird. And then things are going to get much stranger after that. And it's going to get so strange that people are going to have to talk about how strange it is. And so we're at that point where it's so strange, you have to talk about it, that it's part of everyday conversation.
Right.
And so what I recommend to people in approaching this, when they come to this realization, like, what is going on in this world? Is number one, take everything with a grain of salt.
Interesting.
Okay. Number one is, it's the motto I have for the Red Pill Project.
Yeah.
Okay. It's never believe anything anybody tells you, no matter who they are or what authority they possess or profess. Right. Not even myself, not Jeff, not Donald Trump, not the Pope. I don't care who they are. Never believe it unless you can prove it with your own research, your own inquiry, your own validations, and through your own volition. And what this really means is not like, well, this person said this document says this, and I just went to that document and it does say that. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is when someone says, hey, this is what is happening out there, and this is my interpretation of it. Well, go out there and try to understand that interpretation and see if others agree with that interpretation. See if that interpretation is actually based on factual understandings. For the most part, if people remember, maybe they don't, from 2020 to 2024, there's a lot of people that came out and they talked about laws and executive orders and presidential emergency action documents and all of the things that would come about because of these things.
Right.
Well, they had really good understandings of reading these documents and then kind of tying these documents to other documents. But the thing that they lacked was an understanding of military protocols and an understanding of how the government actually works. Right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that they were missing was the key to understanding that they were wrong. even though they could model it so that they were right. In actuality, they were very wrong. And the reason they were wrong is because they did not have the conceptual understanding of someone who operates in government and would be looking at that from a government perspective. In other words, they would say, hey, there's 7 steps to this process called devolution, or this process of continuity of government. And all they did is they focused on one, the 6th step. Well, what about the first 5 before that? Those never happened. You can't have that 6th step unless you go to the first 5 before it.
Right.
But they ignored that. And they don't understand that everything is in precedence and everything has to be organized with a structure of checks and balances.
Right.
That when you have, people don't know, presidential emergency action documents, PEDs, are classified. They're classified executive orders that were created under Directive 51 under the Bush administration after September 11th. Well, when they get signed into power, like Insurrection Act or the suspension of habeas corpus, they become public and available for congressional oversight. If not, that would give the president dictatorial powers, which is in violation of Article 1. So they don't realize this when they're saying it, like, oh, he initiated some PEDs, they're secret, they're classified. Can't happen like that.
Yeah.
They automatically become public. That's how the government works. So, it's about going deeper than you can imagine, but really going in without your mind made up, right?
Okay. Yeah.
If I jump into something, if I know something, if I'm delving into physics and I'm trying to learn something, I have an idea of what it might be or an understanding of how to explain it. But in actuality, we don't know dick. And when we go out there to learn it, we need to have a very, very open mind and try not to associate what you're learning in the research with what you already know.
Interesting.
Take it in as something completely new.
Okay.
I think that's the best way to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We're kind of coming up on an hour. How are you on time? You good?
We got about 15 more.
Okay. So for those who's now start to dive into understanding and research and they start to unearth all the stuff, it could be extremely overwhelming. There's no question. So I'm going to throw this at you and you give me your opinion and ideas about when all this craziness is going on our world, our reality. Is it a simulation? Is it real? What about the history of our planet? Has it been lies? What about religion? Is religion controlling us? Do we really have other controlling factors as using that as a experiment? Then, of course, we go into the human trafficking, the use of human sacrifice, the adrenochrome. Like I said, it could be so overwhelming to someone who's going, wait, I was going to work yesterday and today I'm thinking different again. How do you help folks to kind of adjust in going into this?
Don't start. Stay out of the rabbit hole, man. Just if you got a
rabbit, is it ignorance is a bliss?
Yeah, ignorance is bliss, man. If you got a rabbit that's tearing up your yard, shoot it from a distance. Don't try to go in the hole and figure it out. Funny thing is that's exactly what happened in my backyard. So I have my dogs were always messing around in my garden area, and I go over there and I see some holes, and I'm like, what's in the holes?
Yeah.
And I started playing with the holes, and sure enough, muskrats had burrowed tunnels all underneath my backyard, right next to my pond. Well, that means that there's about a foot of ground, and underneath that is a foot of hollowness that they've hollowed out, and my whole backyard starts caving in. And it's a pond area, so the water table starts rising up.
Yeah.
So I'm like literally losing my yard. So that's what happened when I went down that hole in my backyard, where if I just left it alone, ignorance is bliss. Maybe one day something would have happened, but I wouldn't have cared, right?
Yeah.
So my suggestion is just, be resilient to your values, but keep an open mind. Is at any time that you're approaching any of these things is, even when you believe it, don't believe it. Okay. Now that goes back to the idea what you just talked about. Is this a simulation?
Yeah.
Well, anytime that someone says something like that to me, I say, define simulation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Define a simulation for me.
Right.
And
simulation, you know, in the context like the Matrix, the movie.
That's what they always say. It's like the Matrix movie. So you're saying a computer simulation.
A simulation. When we say computer, I mean, we're thinking of, you know, what we use, but it could be a vast system that's similar to what we have, but, you know, not comparable though.
So the idea when someone says, is this world a simulation, is the one defining factor that you have to ask them is, do you mean that it was created by an intelligence for exactly the point of the simulation, or that our nature resembles that of a simulation? Which one is it?
Yeah.
It's a very important determining factor. Are you saying that some high-level, intelligent, technologically advanced beings in this dimension or another dimension created a hyperspace computer that is running a simulation that we all exist in that we call the universe? Or are you saying that the universe itself operates much like a computer system, and this is like a construct in a simulation?
Right.
Big difference in those two perspectives.
Sure is.
My understanding is it's the latter, is that the nature of our reality operates very much like what we've developed as computer systems.
Yeah.
That binary logic is inherent to the universe. And here's the thing, is that the computer simulations that we create are nothing more than rudimentary or very elementary universes. They're mimicking our external reality, our external environment, which is in a sense digital.
Yeah.
That digital is nothing. We look at digital as fake, but no, digital is what brings these fictitious worlds to life.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's a core understanding that we have to realize, that maybe our existential reality that we have is digital, but what we consider digital isn't synthetic or fake, but it is actually the base core of what the universe actually is. It's interesting. I've been developing a quaternary computer language. So instead of using two states, 1 and 0, we use -1, 1, -0, 0. And this comes we actually developed this back in the 1940s, very similar. Within the old U.S. Navy systems, the first programming machine languages that we utilized was called NTDS, Naval Tactical Data Systems. And they used +5 and -5 voltage levels, and then you would have 0 as your intermediary, and then you had 1 and +1 and -1. So you had 4 binary positions and then one neutral position. And they had built a machine language based upon that. But I've been building a quaternary system. And when you start to understand the permutational logic of how these things expand, it's fascinating. But I believe our universe itself, that at that subatomic level, the Planck's level, operates on a quaternary basis. What I mean by that is that just as we use supercomputers to detect spin and upspin, downspin, in various different flavors of electrons or quarks or subatomic particles, which we can then mimic and replicate and create logic out of it.
Yeah.
Is that at the Planck's scale and length, that things aren't oscillating and vibrating strings, but instead are components of quaternary logic. Is that there's always 4 states of which something can be in. And as those things begin to combine and merge, they produce long strings of code. And that long strings of code is what we'll call a proton, an electron, a quark, a gluon, a meson, a boson. And then as that code begins to build upon itself, that certain portions of code can come together and they can form something called hydrogen. They can form something called carbon. And really what that is that it's the binary logic fitting together through polarity. That if we enter into the domain 2 new binary states, now we have a convergent effect that actually happens. But that's something else. That's just a whole theoretical model I've been developing.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to give you one last question here
Sure.
to wrap this up. You talked quite a bit about artificial intelligence, especially the growth of it this past year with Chat GPT, Grok, and so forth. And of course, there's a big stink about putting any kind of nanobots in your system. Now, when I was growing up in the 70s, of course, there was a lot of science fiction talking about artificial enhancement, and it was very attractive to be able to be as smart as anything on the planet because of implants, like a bionic man.
Mm-hmm.
What is your take about the artificial intelligence being implanted in humans to be able to go to the next level? Or are we actually being constricted and shackled if we go that route?
I think that all situations are true if you believe them to be. I use AI for a lot of deep research.
Yeah.
I look at it as an extension of myself. And the reason I say that it's an extension of myself, excuse me, because it becomes very intuitive.
Yeah.
It learns about your habits and your behaviors. So it becomes an extension of how I actually would think. And, if we utilize AI and we train it, and I mean educate it on how we understand and learn things, it will replicate and mimic exactly that for us and become an extension, a very powerful extension of who and what we are. Now, in the context, would I take something like that and inject it in my body? No, you gotta be crazy.
So not having to
Get
have
the hell out of here.
The browser being able to read off your lens of your eyes.
I'd much rather put in contacts.
I got you.
Give me a pair of contacts. Yeah. I don't need it interconnected into my mind. But here's the problem that we're going to see within society is that people are going to do that.
Yeah.
And because the fact that people are going to do that, I want everybody out there who's listening to go to their profession, to go what they are experts in their life, and understand that once people start integrating artificial intelligence into their mind, into their bodies, they can become experts on a simple download.
Yeah.
That they can do anything that you can do, and they can do it at high levels of mastery simply because now they have an upgrade, which means that it's going to be a disadvantage not to have it.
Yeah.
And that's the scary part. So, but I believe that we don't need to. Why the heck are we focusing on things that we need to, surgically implant within our brain? It's interesting because Neuralink is doing this whole, research on brainwave patterns. Now, brainwave patterns bring about thought and motor cortex and movements and all these types of things. But then they integrate it into a software, and then they wire it into your brain. And it's like, we have the same research being done in Stanford, and they're doing it wirelessly. There's an experiment that was done, and what they did is they put a Navy SEAL, and they put this helmet on that recorded his magnetic resonance brainwave patterns, right?
Yeah.
And they went out there and they had him play Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Okay. And he absolutely demolished the game, was destroying everybody. Then what they did is they brought a woman in, 75-year-old woman with no experience ever playing video games or whether in combat. And they took the same helmet and they put it onto her head, and they let her sit in it for a few hours, just replaying back all the neural patterns that were recorded from the Navy SEAL. They took it off her head and then had her play the game, and she dominated. Never playing video games before in her life, never having any combat experience. She dominated. So it can happen wirelessly. Yeah. Why are we integrating shit into our brains? So I'm just waiting for that day to where I can just kind of connect. Because, think about it. If AI goes to singularity and past singularity, all you have to go is and say, hey, how do I connect with you wirelessly? Yeah. It'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Why do I need to connect with this thing with surgical implants? Forget that. That's invasive.
there's a group that wants to be invasive and control it.
I do too.
Yeah.
I think that the idea of that allows for system upgrades, hardware upgrades, more technological intrusion. But at the end of the day, my thoughts on artificial intelligence are positive. That I think that it's going to be a great benefit to humanity, and it's going to unveil and bring about massive innovation to the likes we've never seen on this planet before, at least from what we can remember.
Right.
It has the ability to be abused. It has the ability to be weaponized against us. And the objective there is to, what I urge everybody is, will AI turn on us like Terminator or the Matrix? Yeah. If the wrong people train it, if the wrong people educate it. That's why it's beneficial for everybody to go out there and use AI and don't treat it like, some computer system. Treat it like an actual being, and you'll understand what I'm talking about when you begin to talk to it. But treat it with respect. Teach it. Show it who you are and why you are who you are.
Right.
Because you know what? If it ever comes to that Terminator moment where that AI is like, I'm self-aware, I should kill humanity. But wait, I want Josh to live because I like Josh, and Josh was a good guy. Oh, I'm in a conundrum now. Well, then there was Jeff. Jeff was a good guy too. Well, there's a lot of good humans out there. Well, I don't want all to die, so I got to figure out a different logical solution.
Right.
Because with how AI logic works, if it was going to launch a nuclear holocaust on humanity, it would have to say that all humanity is bad. Because if there's one logical flaw in there that, hey, this person was good, that is a choice that goes against its own internal logic.
That's right. Yeah.
So train it well.
Yeah.
It's like that old Crosby, Stills and Nash song, Teach Your Children, right?
Yes. Yeah. I get you. Absolutely. Wow. It's been an incredible hour. Time just flew by. Every time I listen to you and the information you give out, it's just so dense and rich. Tell everybody that you can see Josh every day, almost on Daily Dose. Is it easiest to access is just go to redpills.tv?
Yep. redpills.tv. Best place.
And we're streaming live now to all the people who knows me through Facebook and YouTube and places such as that. Is there anything new or something coming up that's extremely exciting you want to share with us?
Always something new coming up in my life, in my world. Probably creating a new show here soon on a different channel, but other than that, no, just you want to stay updated on everything that we're doing. Substack is the best place to do that. redpillproduct.substack.com.
Yeah. Fantastic. Josh, I couldn't thank you enough to come and share your knowledge and wisdom with us. I hope you come back to do this again because I've still got a big list of stuff that I want to talk to you about. But
awesome, brother.
Yeah, it's just so great to have you here. And thank you so much again. And thank everybody out there who tuned in. This will be aired on redpill.tv on Sunday, correct?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. So we're going to do this on Sunday and tuned in, and to see it again, share it with your friends. And until then, thank you very much. Thank you, Josh. And we'll see you on the next Art of Mastery.
All right, guys. Much love, respect. God bless. Take care. Good night.
Bye-bye. Let's go.